A black woman was ignored in the pharmacy line, but her reaction made everyone reflect. Maria Rodriguez hadn't meant to wince so visibly when she stepped into CVS Pharmacy, but her back spasmed the moment the automatic doors slid open with their familiar whoosh. The cool air conditioning hit her face, a stark contrast to the sweltering July heat outside. She'd been cleaning offices since 6 a.m., and now, at 2:47 p.m., every muscle in her body screamed for relief. "Mama, you should have called me. I would have picked up your prescription," her daughter Carmen had insisted that morning. But Maria had waved her off with a tired smile. "Mija, you have your nursing classes. I can handle a simple trip to the pharmacy." Now, standing just inside the entrance, Maria wasn't so sure. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making the pain behind her eyes throb even more. She glanced down at the prescription in her hand, now wrinkled from being clutched in her palm during the bus ride. Dr. Patterson had finally prescribed something stronger for her back pain after months of Maria insisting that over-the-counter medications weren't cutting it anymore. "Good afternoon. Welcome to CVS." A young employee called out cheerfully as she restocked the seasonal aisle with back-to-school supplies. Maria managed a small smile, remembering how she used to scrimp and save for her children's school supplies. Now Carmen was in nursing school, Miguel had his own auto repair shop, and little Anna was finishing high school with straight A's. The pharmacy line wasn't too long, just 4 people ahead of her. Maria took her place, trying to find a comfortable way to stand. Her work shoes, bought on clearance 2 years ago, had long since lost their cushioning. She'd learned to ignore the burning in her feet during her shifts, but now, standing still, every nerve ending seemed to wake up at once. Next, the pharmacist called, and Maria watched as an elderly man shuffled forward with his wife. They reminded her of her own parents back in Honduras. Her father had passed 5 years ago, and her mother. Maria pushed the thought away. She couldn't afford to cry, not here, not now. The elderly couple took their time, asking questions about each medication. Maria didn't mind. She understood how confusing all those pills could be. She'd helped enough elderly clients with their medication schedules during her years as a home health aide before switching to office cleaning for better pay. Maria? Maria Rodriguez? A familiar voice pulled her from her thoughts. It was Mrs. Thompson, one of the office workers from the building she cleaned. "Mrs. Thompson, hello!" Maria straightened up instinctively, ignoring the protest from her lower back. "I hardly recognized you in regular clothes," Mrs. Thompson laughed, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I mean, I usually see you in your uniform." "Yes, I understand," Maria said softly. She'd learned long ago how to make others comfortable when they stumbled over such comments. "How is your son doing? You mentioned he was applying to colleges?" Mrs. Thompson's face lit up. "Oh, he got into state. Full ride." She launched into a detailed description of her son's scholarship, seemingly forgetting her earlier awkwardness. Next, the pharmacist's voice cut through their conversation. The elderly couple had finished, and a woman in designer yoga pants strode confidently to the counter, even though Maria was sure she hadn't been in line before. Maria opened her mouth to say something, then closed it. Mrs. Thompson was still talking about her son's accomplishments, and Maria found herself nodding along, her grip tightening on her prescription. The paper was damp now, the doctor's handwriting starting to blur slightly at the edges. "I should let you go," Mrs. Thompson finally said, glancing at her watch. "My lunch break is almost over. You take care, Maria." "You too, Mrs. Thompson. Congratulations again about your son." As Mrs. Thompson walked away, Maria heard her phone chime. It was a text from Carmen. "Mama, did you get your medicine yet? Do you need me to come?" Maria typed back slowly, her fingers stiff from years of gripping cleaning supplies. "Still in line, Mija. Don't worry. Focus on your studies." The line had grown behind her. A young mother trying to quiet a fussy toddler, a teenager with acne cream, an older black woman in scrubs who looked as tired as Maria felt. They all formed a quiet community of waiting, each lost in their own thoughts and discomforts. Next. Maria looked up hopefully, but a man in a business suit who had been checking his phone by the magazine rack walked straight to the counter. The pharmacist, a middle-aged white man with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, greeted him with a smile. "Just picking up for Williams," the man said, not even glancing at Maria or the others in line. Maria felt her chest tighten. She'd been standing there for 20 minutes now, watching people get served out of order. The pain in her back had spread to her shoulders, and she could feel a familiar burning behind her eyes, the same feeling she'd had 30 years ago when she'd first arrived in this country and realized that some people would always see right through her. A memory surfaced. Carmen at age 7, coming home from school in tears because some kids had told her to go back to Mexico, even though they were from Honduras. Maria had sat her down and explained that some people would always try to make them feel small, but that their worth wasn't determined by others' ignorance. "Be proud," she had told Carmen. "Be proud and be better than them." Now, watching the man in the suit collect his prescription and leave without a backward glance, Maria wondered if she'd given her children the right advice. Maybe sometimes you needed to speak up, to demand the respect you deserved. But not today. Not when her back felt like it was being stabbed with hot needles. Not when she still had another shift to work tonight. Not when. Next. A woman in yoga pants who had been doing something on her phone near the vitamin display walked straight to the counter. The pharmacist's smile never wavered as he asked for her name. Maria closed her eyes briefly, thinking of the cleaning she still had to do, of the offices waiting for her skilled hands, of the people who worked there who would never know her name or notice her existence until something wasn't cleaned to their satisfaction. The security guard, a young black man who looked about Miguel's age, caught her eye. Something passed between them, a look of understanding, of shared experience. He offered her a small nod, and Maria felt her shoulders straighten slightly, despite the pain. She thought about what Carmen would say if she were here, her daughter, studying to be a nurse, who never hesitated to speak up when she saw injustice, who had once told her, "Mama, your silence won't protect you." But Carmen wasn't here. It was just Maria, her aching back, her crumpled prescription, and a lifetime of being overlooked, underestimated, and ignored. She watched as the woman in yoga pants collected her prescription and walked away, chatting loudly on her phone about her upcoming spin class. The line behind Maria had grown longer. The baby was crying harder now, and its mother was bouncing it desperately, whispering soothing words in Spanish. Maria wanted to turn around, to offer help or comfort, but moving seemed impossible now. The pain had settled into every joint, every muscle, making her feel twice her 53 years. Next. Maria took a step forward, hope rising in her chest. But a man in an expensive suit walked straight up to the counter from where he'd been standing by the blood pressure machine. The pharmacist's eyes slid right past Maria as if she were made of glass. And something inside her, something that had been bending and bending for decades, finally began to break. The man in the suit cleared his throat impatiently. "Jenkins, Robert Jenkins." The baby behind Maria let out another wail, and she heard the mother's desperate whispers. "Shh, mi amor, ya casi, ya casi." Maria felt a bead of sweat roll down her back. The fluorescent light seemed to grow brighter, more harsh. Her fingers trembled as she clutched her prescription. Patterson's messy handwriting now barely legible from how tightly she'd been holding it. "I am sorry, Mr. Jenkins," the pharmacist was saying, "but it looks like your insurance is showing a rejection code. Let me call them real quick." While the pharmacist made the call, Mr. Jenkins pulled out his phone, speaking loudly into it. "Yeah, I'll be a few minutes late to the meeting. Some issue with my prescription." You know how these places can be. So inefficient. Maria almost laughed at the irony. Inefficient. She thought about efficiency, about how she'd learned to clean an entire floor of offices in exactly 4 hours, moving like a well-oiled machine through the empty rooms while the people who worked there slept soundly in their beds, about how she'd figured out the exact bus routes to get her kids to 3 different schools on time, never once being late, about how she'd stretched every dollar, every minute, every ounce of energy to make sure her children had better opportunities than she'd had. The mother with the crying baby stepped closer to Maria. "Disculp," she whispered. "Do you know how much longer? My baby has fever." Maria turned carefully, her back protesting the movement. The young mother looked barely 20, with dark circles under her eyes and a diaper bag threatening to slip off her shoulder. The baby's face was flushed, tiny hands balled into fists. "Here," Maria said, stepping aside slightly. "You go ahead of me." "Oh no, senora, I couldn't." "Please," Maria insisted. "Babies shouldn't have to wait." The young mother's eyes filled with tears. "Gracias, senora. Que Dios le bendiga." But before the mother could step forward, a well-dressed older woman walked straight to the counter. Mr. Jenkins had finally finished his insurance issue and left, and the pharmacist was already asking for the new woman's information. "Dorothy Miller," the woman said crisply, picking up 2 prescriptions. The baby's cries grew louder. Maria felt something shift inside her chest, not the familiar resignation, but something hotter, something that made her hands shake for reasons that had nothing to do with pain. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Carmen. "Mama, I finished class early. I am coming to pick you up." Maria stared at the message, remembering all the times she'd told her children to be patient, to work twice as hard, to keep their heads down and their dignity intact. But what kind of dignity was there in being invisible? The security guard was watching again. He'd shifted closer to the pharmacy area, his face a mask of professional neutrality, but his eyes showed that he knew exactly what was happening. "Next!" A teenager who'd been browsing magazines stepped up to the counter. He couldn't have been older than 17, wearing expensive headphones around his neck and designer sneakers that probably cost more than Maria made in a week. The young mother behind her let out a soft sob as her baby's cries intensified. The older black woman in scrubs who had been waiting spoke up quietly. "That child needs help. She's been waiting just like the rest of us." But her words were lost under the sound of the teenager's music, which he was now playing out loud while the pharmacist checked his prescription. Maria felt her phone buzz again, but she couldn't look at it. The pain in her back had become a dull roar, but it was nothing compared to the pressure building in her chest, the weight of 40 years of swallowed words rising up her throat like bile. She thought about Carmen, about how proud she was of her daughter's fierce sense of justice, about Miguel, who had refused to let customers at his auto shop treat his Mexican mechanics with disrespect, about Anna, who was writing her college application essay about being the daughter of an immigrant cleaning woman. The teenager collected his prescription and walked away, never removing his headphones. The pharmacist's eyes swept the line again, looking past Maria, past the crying baby, past the woman in scrubs. And something inside Maria, something that had been bending and bending for decades, didn't just begin to break, it shattered completely. "I am standing right here." Maria's voice erupted from somewhere deep inside her, a place she hadn't known existed. The pharmacy went suddenly, completely silent. Even the baby stopped crying, startled by the outburst. "I've been standing right here for 45 minutes. Her hands were shaking violently now, the prescription fluttering like a wounded bird. The fluorescent lights seemed to pulse with each beat of her racing heart. The pharmacist blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The security guard took 2 steps forward, then stopped, watching intently. "Ma'am, if you could just," the pharmacist started, but Maria cut him off. No, you don't get to ma'am me now." Her voice was steady, despite the trembling in her legs. "I watched you help 12 people, yes, I counted. 12 people who came after me. Some of them weren't even in line." A woman browsing the vitamin aisle dropped her basket. The clatter of bottles hitting the floor echoed through the store. I didn't realize," the pharmacist stammered. "You didn't realize?" Maria's laugh was sharp, brittle. "Like you didn't realize when Mrs. Miller walked right up to the counter? Like you didn't realize when that boy with the headphones cut in line? Like you didn't realize this baby has been crying with fever?" The young mother behind her made a soft sound, clutching her child close. An elderly white woman with carefully styled hair stepped out of the line. She's right. I've been watching this whole time. It's disgraceful. Mind your own business, someone muttered from near the blood pressure machine. This is my business. The elderly woman shot back, her voice trembling with emotion. This is all of our business. I've lived in this town for 63 years, and I've seen this same story play out over and over. Well, I am tired of it. The pharmacy manager emerged from the back, a tall woman with graying hair pulled into a severe bun. What seems to be the problem here? The problem? Maria turned to face her, and suddenly 40 years of cleaning other people's offices, of being invisible, of swallowing her pride, came pouring out. The problem is that I clean your offices every night. I dust your desks and empty your trash, and wipe your fingerprints off your glass door. I do this with a smile, even when my back is screaming, even when people leave cruel notes about a spot I missed. She took a shaky breath. I raised 3 children alone after their father died. I never asked for handouts. I paid every bill on time. I taught my children to be proud, to work hard, to respect everyone. And this is what I get? To be treated like I am nothing? Like I am invisible? The manager's face had gone pale. Sir, she turned to the pharmacist. Is this true? Have you been serving customers out of order? Before he could answer, the security guard spoke up. Yes, ma'am, he has. I've been watching it happen all afternoon. A murmur went through the growing crowd of onlookers. The man in the suit who had cut in line earlier was still there, his face flushed red as he studied his expensive shoes. I have cameras, the guard continued, his voice gaining strength. I can pull the footage right now. The pharmacy manager's expression hardened. That won't be necessary. I've seen enough. She turned to Maria, her voice softening. Ma'am, may I see your prescription? Maria held out the crumpled paper with trembling fingers. The manager took it gently. Jason, she addressed the pharmacist, go take your break. We'll discuss this in my office later. The pharmacist's face was ashen as he walked away. The manager herself went to fill Maria's prescription. It's not just today. The elderly white woman spoke up again. I've seen it happen before. We all have. We didn't say anything. We looked away. The woman in scrubs nodded. Every time I come here, every single time. But she's so clean. A younger woman in designer clothes whispered to her friend, apparently thinking she couldn't be heard. I mean, she doesn't look like... Like what? Maria turned to her, and the woman flinched at the fire in her eyes. Like a cleaning woman? What does a cleaning woman look like? Should I wear my uniform everywhere I go? Should I carry my mop like a flag? I didn't mean... Yes, you did. The elderly white woman cut in. You meant exactly what you said. And that's part of the problem, isn't it? All these things we say and think and pretend we don't mean. The young mother with the baby stepped forward, her voice quiet but clear. Last week, I came for my son's medicine. I waited 2 hours because people kept cutting in line. My baby's fever got worse. I had to take him to the emergency room that night. The pharmacy manager returned with Maria's prescription. Ma'am, I want to apologize on behalf of CVS. This is not what we stand for. I've marked your prescriptions as priority from now on, and I'd like to waive the cost of today's medication. Maria shook her head. I don't want special treatment. I want equal treatment for everyone. She gestured to the young mother. Fill her prescription next. The baby needs it more than I do. The manager nodded, taking the young mother's prescription. The baby had fallen asleep, exhausted from crying. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several people stopped to speak to Maria. The elderly white woman touched her arm gently. I am Barbara, she said. I am on the town council. We need to have a larger conversation about this. Would you be willing to speak at our next meeting? Maria thought about Carmen, about how proud she would be, about Miguel and Anna, about all the times they'd asked why she didn't speak up. Yes, she said firmly. Yes, I will. The security guard gave her a subtle thumbs up as she finally turned to leave, her prescription and her dignity clutched firmly in her hand. Outside, the July heat hit her like a wall, but she barely noticed. Her phone buzzed, another text from Carmen. Mama, I am almost there. Everything okay? Maria looked at her phone, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. But they weren't tears of shame or frustration. They were tears of relief, of release, of something that felt surprisingly like victory. "See, Mija," she typed back. "Everything is okay. For the first time in a long time, everything is really okay." As she waited for Carmen, Maria watched people leaving the pharmacy. Some avoided her eyes, hurrying to their cars. Others nodded respectfully. The young mother came out, her baby peaceful now, and mouthed "gracias" before getting into a waiting car. The man in the expensive suit approached her, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Ma'am, I want to apologize. What I did, it wasn't right." Maria looked at him steadily. "No, it wasn't. I've never thought of myself as prejudiced. But today, I didn't even see you. I just didn't see you." And now, he met her eyes. "Now I see you, ma'am. I see you very clearly." Carmen's old Honda pulled up to the curb. Maria could see her daughter's worried face through the windshield. "Good," she told the man. "Remember this feeling. Remember what it was like to finally see." She walked to the car, her back still aching but her steps lighter somehow. As she settled into the passenger seat, Carmen immediately began fussing. "Mama, you are crying. What happened? Did they give you trouble about the prescription? I knew I should have come with you." Maria reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "No, Mija. Today, I gave them trouble. Today, I made them see me." Carmen stared at her mother, eyes wide. "You? Gave them trouble? You?" Maria smiled, wiping the last tears from her cheeks. "Me, the invisible cleaning woman who finally became visible." As Carmen pulled away from the curb, Maria watched the pharmacy disappear in the side mirror. The security guard was standing outside now, talking to the elderly white woman, Barbara, and writing something in a small notebook. "Tell me everything," Carmen demanded, turning down the radio, "and don't leave anything out." So Maria told her about the waiting, the dismissals, the people cutting in line, about the crying baby and the mother's desperation, about how something inside her had finally snapped. "I wish I had been there," Carmen said fiercely. "I would have." "No, Mija." Maria touched her daughter's arm. "This was something I needed to do myself. All these years I've told you children to speak up, to stand tall, to demand respect. But I wasn't doing it myself. I was teaching you one thing and living another." They stopped at a red light, and Carmen turned to look at her mother properly. "You've always been the strongest person I know, Mama. Always." "Strong, yes, but quiet. Too quiet." Maria looked down at the prescription bag in her lap. "You know what the manager did? She tried to give me the medicine for." "That's good, isn't it?" I don't want charity. I want dignity. I want them to look at me, at all of us, and see people, not problems to be solved with free medicine." The light turned green, and Carmen accelerated carefully. "What did you say to her?" "I told her to help the young mother with the sick baby instead. And then," Maria smiled slightly, "then Barbara, the elderly white woman who spoke up, she invited me to speak at the town council meeting." Carmen nearly swerved the car. "The town council? Mama, that's huge. When is—" "I don't know yet. She gave her number to the security guard to give to me." Maria paused. "I think I scared some people today, Carmen. They didn't expect. They never expect. They never expect us to have voices." Carmen finished. "They never expect us to be articulate, educated, dignified. They see our skin, our accents, our jobs, and they think they know everything about us." They pulled up to their apartment building, but neither made a move to get out of the car. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windshield. "You know what was strange?" Maria said softly. "When I finally spoke up, when I finally let all those years of silence break open, it wasn't just about me anymore. The woman in scrubs, she said it happens to her every time too. The young mother with the baby, she told her story. Even the security guard. He'd been watching it all happen, day after day." Carmen took her mother's hand. "That's how change happens, Mom." One voice breaks the silence, and then another joins in, and another, until the silence can't contain the truth anymore. "The man in the suit apologized to me," Maria added. "He said he hadn't seen me before, but now he did. I told him to remember what that felt like. They sat in silence for a moment, the car's cooling engine ticking quietly. So, Carmen finally said, a smile playing at her lips. My quiet, patient mother caused a scene at CVS and got invited to speak at the town council. What's next? Running for mayor? Maria laughed. Really laughed. For the first time that day. I know. One revolution at a time, Mija. Besides, she added, her voice growing serious, this isn't about me becoming someone else. It's about me finally being who I've always been, just louder. As they got out of the car, Maria's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. This is Barbara from CVS. The council meeting is next Thursday at 7 p.m. Your story needs to be heard. Will you come? Maria showed the message to Carmen, who immediately pulled out her own phone. I am taking that evening off from clinical rotations. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. Looking up at their apartment building, Maria thought about all the times she'd climbed these stairs in silence, carrying the weight of 1,000 small indignities. Today, despite her aching back, despite the emotional exhaustion, she felt lighter. You know what the pharmacy manager said? She told Carmen as they climbed the stairs. This is not what we stand for. But it is what they stand for, until someone stands up and says no more. They reached their floor, and Carmen unlocked their apartment door. Inside, the small space was neat and clean. Maria had always taken pride in keeping her own home as spotless as the offices she cleaned. I need to call Miguel and Ana, Carmen said, heading for the kitchen. They're not going to believe this. Maria sat carefully on their worn but well-kept couch, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Her back still ached, but it was a distant concern now. Mama? Carmen called from the kitchen. What are you going to say at the council meeting? Maria closed her eyes, remembering the faces in the pharmacy, the shocked pharmacist, the ashamed customers, the grateful young mother, the proud security guard. She thought about all the other Marias out there, standing in lines, being overlooked, swallowing their dignity day after day. The truth, Mija, she said finally. I am going to tell the truth, and this time they're going to have to listen. The apartment doorbell rang, making both Maria and Carmen jump. When Carmen opened the door, Ana stood there, still in her high school uniform, her eyes wide with excitement. Carmen texted me what happened, she burst out, rushing to hug Maria. Mama, I can't believe you did that. This is going into my college essay for sure. Maria stroked her youngest daughter's hair. Mi amor, your essay should be about you, not your mother causing trouble at CVS. But that's exactly what it's about. Ana pulled back, her eyes shining. It's about being the daughter of a woman who taught us to be strong by showing us how to be strong. About how sometimes the quietest people have the loudest voices when they finally speak up. Carmen came back from the kitchen with 3 mugs of tea. Did you tell her about the town council meeting, Mama? Town council? Ana's eyes grew even wider. What town council? As Maria explained, her phone kept buzzing. News had spread through the local Hispanic community like wildfire. Her friend Rosa from church texted, Mi hermana, you did what we've all wanted to do for years. The mother of one of Ana's classmates wrote, you speak for all of us. It's becoming bigger than just what happened at the pharmacy, Carmen observed, reading the messages over her mother's shoulder. Maria felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I should just… Don't you dare, Mama, Ana interrupted fiercely. Don't you dare back down now. You know what Mrs. Rodriguez told me in AP History last week? She said that change never comes from comfortable places. It comes from moments when someone finally says enough. The door opened again, and Miguel walked in, still in his mechanic's uniform, grease stains on his hands. Carmen called me, he said simply, crossing the room to hug his mother. He smelled of motor oil and determination. My quiet mama, he said, grinning. Not so quiet anymore, huh? Maria looked at her 3 children, Carmen, the future nurse, Miguel, the successful business owner, Ana, the brilliant student, and felt tears threatening again. I kept thinking about you 3, she admitted, about all the times I told you to stand up for yourselves, about how proud I am when you do. And there I was, letting people walk right past me like I was invisible. You weren't ready before, Carmen said gently. But you were ready today. Miguel sat on the arm of the couch. You know what this reminds me of? Remember when that customer at my shop started yelling at Jorge because his English wasn't Remember what you told me when I called you furious? Maria nodded. Sometimes people need to be shown their own ugliness in a mirror. Exactly. And today, Mama, you held up a mirror in that pharmacy. You showed them exactly who they were and who you are. Anna was scrolling through her phone. It's already on the community Facebook page. People are sharing their own stories. The Korean lady from the grocery store, Miss Washington from the barber shop. Everyone has a story like this. Maria's phone buzzed again. This time it was Barbara. Just spoke to the council chairman. They're giving you a 10-minute slot. This is important, Maria. This is how things start to change. The sun was setting outside their window, casting the small apartment in soft, golden light. Maria looked around at her children, at the home she'd built through years of invisible labor, at the life she'd created from determination and dream. You know what the hardest part was? She said quietly. Not the standing up, not the speaking out. The hardest part was admitting to myself that I deserved better, that we all deserve better. Miguel squeezed her shoulder. And now? Now? Maria straightened her back, ignoring the pain. Now I have a speech to write, and a lot of people to speak for. Carmen was already pulling out a notebook. We'll help you, Mama. We'll make sure every word counts. I don't want it to be angry, Maria said firmly. T hears enough anger in the world. I want it to be true. I want it to make them think. I want it to make them see. Anna curled up beside her mother on the couch. Like you made them see you today? Yes, mi amor. Exactly like that. As her children began brainstorming ideas for her speech, Maria closed her eyes briefly. She thought about the young mother with the sick baby, about the security guard who had watched silently day after day, about Barbara who had finally found her own voice by supporting Maria's. One person speaks up, and then another, until the silence can't contain the truth anymore. Carmen's words echoed in her mind, and Maria knew that what had happened today in that pharmacy was just the beginning. The truth was finally too loud to ignore. The town council chamber was smaller than Maria had expected. She sat in the third row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, Carmen and Anna on either side of her. Miguel was running late from the shop, but he'd promised to make it in time for her speech. 10 minutes until we start, Barbara whispered, leaning forward from the row behind them. Are you ready? Maria nodded, though her heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone must hear it. The past week had been a whirlwind. Her story had spread through the community like a quiet fire, igniting other stories, other voices. Mama, look, Anna whispered, nudging her gently. The young mother from the pharmacy had just walked in, her baby sleeping peacefully in a carrier. She caught Maria's eye and smiled shyly. More familiar faces filed in. The security guard from CVS, now in civilian clothes. Several of Maria's co-workers from the cleaning service. Mrs. Thompson from the office building, looking somewhat uncomfortable, but determined to be there. I didn't expect so many people, Maria murmured to Carmen. They're here because you gave them permission to be seen, Mama, Carmen replied softly. Look, even Dr. Patterson came. Indeed, Maria's doctor was settling into a seat near the back, catching her eye with an encouraging nod. The council members began filing in, taking their seats at the raised platform. Maria recognized some of them from their campaign posters, mostly older white men in suits, looking slightly bewildered at the unusual turnout for what was typically a sparsely attended meeting. Is that him? Anna whispered suddenly. Maria didn't need to ask who she meant. The pharmacist was there, sitting near the door, his face pale and drawn. He'd been suspended pending an investigation, according to Barbara's updates. Good, Carmen muttered. He should hear this. The council chairman called the meeting to order, his gavel echoing in the now-packed chamber. Before we address the regular agenda items, we have a special presentation. Mrs. Maria Rodriguez would like to address the council regarding an incident at CVS Pharmacy last week. Maria stood slowly, her back still tender but stronger now. As she made her way to the podium, she felt the weight of all those eyes on her. But for the first time in her life, she didn't want to disappear under their gaze. "Good evening," she began, her accent thick with nervousness but her voice clear. "My name is Maria Rodriguez. I clean your offices. I clean your buildings. I am the person you don't see when you leave work at night. But I see you. I see everything." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Miguel had slipped in at the back, still in his work clothes, giving her a thumbs up. "Last week, I stood in line at CVS for 45 minutes, watching person after person cut ahead of me while the pharmacist looked right through me. But this isn't about one pharmacist, or one store, or one afternoon." The council members shifted in their seats. One of them was taking notes. "This is about being invisible until something goes wrong. Then we become very visible. When a trash can is missed, when a floor isn't perfect, when an accent is too thick, then suddenly we exist." She saw Mrs. Thompson duck her head, perhaps remembering her own comment about not recognizing Maria in regular clothes. "I raised 3 children alone after their father died. My oldest daughter is in nursing school. My son owns his own business. My youngest is applying to college with a 4.0 GPA. I tell you this not to brag, but to show you that we are more than what you see when you look past us." The young mother's baby made a soft sound, and Maria smiled slightly. That day at CVS, I wasn't the only one being invisible. There was a young mother with a sick baby, waiting while others cut in line. There was a tired nurse in scrubs, waiting her turn that never seemed to come. There was a security guard watching it all happen, day after day, because who would listen if he spoke up? The security guard nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. When I finally spoke up, something strange happened. Others began to speak too. The elderly white woman who had watched it all, "Thank you, Barbara," found her voice. The nurse shared her story. Even the man in the suit who had cut in line, he saw himself clearly for the first time. Maria's hands were shaking slightly, but her voice remained steady. "This isn't just about a pharmacy line. This is about every time one of your cleaning staff is treated like furniture. About every time an accent makes someone too difficult to understand. About every time a mother has to watch her children learn that some people will always see right through them." She looked directly at the council members now. "You say you want to know why young people leave this town after graduation, why small businesses struggle to find workers, why here is so much division, so much mistrust. But the answer is right in front of you, if you are willing to see it." The chamber was absolutely silent. Even the baby seemed to be listening. "I don't want special treatment. I don't want to skip lines or get free medicine. I want what everyone wants: to be seen, to be heard, to be treated with basic human dignity." Barbara was openly crying now. So were several others. "Your offices, your buildings, your streets, they don't clean themselves. Your elderly aren't cared for by invisible hands. Your cars aren't fixed by nameless mechanics. We are here. We have always been here. We have names, stories, families, dreams, and we are tired of being invisible." Maria took a deep breath. That day at CVS, the pharmacist finally saw me, really saw me. And you know what he said? He said he didn't realize. That's what we hear over and over. I didn't realize. Well, now you realize. Now you know. The question is, what will you do about it? She paused, looking at her children. Carmen was beaming through her tears. Anna was recording everything on her phone. Miguel stood tall and proud. "I clean your offices every night. I do it well, and I do it with pride. But I am not invisible. We are not invisible, and we will not be invisible anymore." The silence held for a moment after she finished. Then, from somewhere in the back, someone began to clap. The sound spread like a wave, building until the small chamber seemed to shake with it. The council chairman had to bang his gavel several times to restore order. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said, his voice slightly hoarse, "thank you for your powerful testimony. Would you be willing to serve on our newly formed Community Relations Committee?" Maria blinked in surprise. I work 2 jobs, sir. I don't have much free time. We'll schedule around your availability, he said quickly. Your voice. We need your voice. As Maria made her way back to her seat, people reached out to touch her arm, to whisper thank you, to share their own quick stories. The pharmacist stood as she passed, his eyes red. Mrs. Rodriguez, he said quietly, I am sorry. I am so sorry. Maria looked at him for a long moment. Don't be sorry, she finally said. Be better. When she reached her seat, her children enveloped her in a group hug. Mama, Carmen whispered, you did it. You really did it. But Maria wasn't done. She turned to Barbara. The committee they mentioned, will you serve on it too? We need voices from all parts of the community. Barbara wiped her eyes. Try and stop me. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Afterward, people lingered, sharing stories, exchanging numbers, making plans. The young mother from the pharmacy introduced herself properly. Her name was Lucia, and her baby was finally over his fever. The security guard shook Maria's hand. I've worked at that CVS for 3 years. He said, what you did, it changed things. They're implementing new policies, mandatory training. It's not perfect, but it's a start, Maria finished. As they finally left the chamber, stepping into the warm evening air, Miguel put his arm around his mother's shoulders. So, Mama, still think causing trouble at CVS was a mistake? Maria laughed, a free and unburdened sound. No, mijijo. Sometimes trouble is exactly what's needed to make things right. Anna was practically bouncing as they walked to their cars. Did you see their faces when you talked about the invisible hands cleaning their offices? I thought Councilman Peters was going to sink through his chair. I saw him checking his phone right after, Carmen added, probably texting his cleaning service. Maria felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. It was Mrs. Thompson, looking flustered. Maria, I need to say something. Maria turned to face her, aware of her children tensing protectively around her. When I saw you at CVS that day, Mrs. Thompson began, wringing her hands, and made that comment about your uniform. I've been sick about it ever since. I thought I was being friendly, but I was being condescending, Carmen suggested sharply. Carmen, Maria warned softly, then turned back to Mrs. Thompson. Yes, you were, but you are here now, listening. That's how change begins. The parking lot was full of small groups of people, still talking, still sharing stories. The parking lot was full of small groups of people, still talking, still sharing stories. The council chairman was deep in conversation with Lucia and several other community members. Barbara was exchanging phone numbers with the security guard and a group of small business owners. Mama, Miguel said suddenly, look who's coming. The pharmacist was walking toward them, his tie loosened, his shoulders slumped. Maria's children moved closer to her instinctively. Mrs. Rodriguez, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Your speech, it made me realize something. I've been a pharmacist for 15 years. I've probably done this thousands of times without even thinking about it. I followed the loudest voice, the most demanding customer. I told myself it was about efficiency. Maria waited, saying nothing. But that baby could have been seriously ill. That nurse could have been heading to a night shift. You were in pain. His voice cracked. I am going to resign. No, Maria said firmly, surprising everyone. Don't resign. Change. Learn. Teach others to be better. If you resign, someone else will take your place, and maybe they'll be just the same. But if you change, if you help change the system. He looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. Why would you want to help me after what I did? Because this isn't about punishment, Maria explained. It's about transformation, about making sure the next Maria, the next Lucia, the next tired nurse in scrubs. They don't have to become invisible to survive. The night air was thick with humidity, but Maria felt oddly energized despite her long day. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from people who'd been at the meeting, sharing their own stories, offering support, asking how they could help. "Mrs. Rodriguez, it was the council chairman. We'd like to schedule our first committee meeting for next week. Would Tuesday evening work for you?" Maria glanced at her children, then at Barbara, who had joined their group. "Actually, sir, I work Tuesday evenings. I clean the law offices on 3rd Street. The chairman flushed slightly. "Of course, I apologize. We'll find a time that works for everyone. And perhaps we should look at where we hold these meetings too. The community center might be more accessible." "Now you are getting it," Barbara said with a smile. As they finally headed to their cars, Maria felt something shift in the air, not just around her, but within her. The pain in her back was still there, but it seemed less important somehow. "Mama," Anna said softly, "remember when I was little and I asked you why we had to be invisible?" Maria remembered. It had been after a particularly difficult day at school, when Anna's perfect English and excellent grades hadn't been enough to shield her from casual cruelty. "You told me we weren't invisible. We were just waiting for the right moment to be seen." Anna squeezed her mother's hand. "I think this was the moment." Carmen unlocked their car. "The newspaper wants to interview you tomorrow, Mama, and 3 other community organizations have reached out." Maria leaned back in the passenger seat, closing her eyes briefly. "You know what's strange? For years, I thought speaking up would mean losing something, my job, my dignity, my place in this community. But instead, you gained a voice," Miguel finished, leaning in through the window. "And you helped others find theirs." As they drove home through the familiar streets, Maria thought about all the invisible people who kept this town running: the cleaners, the gardeners, the dishwashers, the home health aides. Tonight, some of them had become visible. Tomorrow, perhaps more would step into the light. Her phone buzzed one last time. It was a text from Lucia. "My baby's fever never came back. Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for seeing us." Maria smiled, typing back. "We see each other now. That's what matters." The streetlights cast long shadows as they pulled up to their apartment building. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new opportunities for change. But tonight, Maria Rodriguez, the cleaning woman who had finally refused to be invisible, would sleep soundly, knowing she had helped crack open the silence that had contained too many truths for far too long. Chapter 4. 1 month after the incident at CVS, Maria walked through the automatic doors again. This time, everything felt different. The same fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but they didn't seem as hard. Her back still ached from the morning's work, but she held herself straighter now. "Good morning, Mrs. Rodriguez." The security guard, James, she knew his name now, greeted her with a warm smile. "How was the community meeting last night?" "Productive," she replied, returning his smile. "You should come to the next one. We're discussing implementing bilingual signage in all public buildings." The pharmacy area had changed. A large sign now hung prominently. "Customers will be served in order of arrival. No exceptions." Below it, the same message appeared in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean. A numbered ticket system had been installed, and chairs lined the wall for those waiting. Mrs. Rodriguez, the pharmacy manager, Mrs. Chen, emerged from behind the counter. In the past month, she had proven herself to be more than just someone who had acted in a moment of crisis. She had become a true ally in implementing change. "How are the new procedures working?" Maria asked, noting the orderly line and the diverse mix of people waiting patiently with their numbered ticket. Mrs. Chen beamed. "Wonderfully. Complaints are down, customer satisfaction is up, and..." She lowered her voice. "Corporate is using our store as a model for nationwide implementation." A familiar face caught Maria's attention. The young mother, Lucia, was there with her baby, who was now crawling and considerably more energetic. "Maria," Lucia waved. "Did you see? They're offering the pharmacy information sheets in Spanish now. No more trying to understand complicated instructions through Google Translate." The changes weren't just superficial. The pharmacist, who had indeed stayed at Maria's insistence, was currently speaking through a translator phone to an elderly Chinese woman, taking the time to ensure she understood her medication instructions completely. "We've instituted mandatory cultural sensitivity training," Mrs. Chen explained, following Maria's gaze. Not just here, but in all stores in the district, and we're hiring more bilingual staff. Maria took her place in line, accepting her numbered ticket. Behind her, an elderly white man struck up a conversation with a young Middle Eastern woman about the weather. A black businessman in an expensive suit waited patiently for his turn. No attempts to push ahead or assert privilege. "You know," James said, coming to stand near Maria, "something interesting happened yesterday. A guy tried to skip the line, claimed he was in a hurry. Before any of us could say anything, 3 other customers spoke up, told him everyone's time was valuable." Maria smiled. The invisible becoming visible. Her phone buzzed, a text from Barbara. "School board approved the new diversity initiatives. Your speech last week made the difference." Another message followed immediately after, this one from Carmen. "Mama, the nursing program wants you to speak at orientation about patient dignity and equal treatment. Please say yes." The pharmacy's intercom crackled. "Now serving number 23. Maria looked at her ticket. 24. Perfect timing. As she waited, she remembered something Carmen had said the night of the town council meeting. One voice breaks the silence, and then another joins in, until the silence can't contain the truth anymore. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" A new pharmacy technician called her forward, a young Latina woman who hadn't been there a month ago. Her name tag read Isabella, and beneath it, Hablo Español. "Good morning," Maria said in English, handing over her prescription. "How are you today?" "I am good. Actually," Isabella lowered her voice, "I wanted to thank you. I heard about what happened here. It's why I applied for this job. My mother, she's like you. A cleaning woman. She cried when she read about you in the community paper." Before Maria could respond, she heard a commotion near the entrance. An elderly black woman had fallen, her cane clattering to the floor. Instantly, 3 people rushed to help her up. The pharmacist emerged from behind the counter with a chair. James brought her a cup of water. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Mrs. Chen asked, her hand on the woman's shoulder. "Should we call someone?" "I am fine," the woman said, catching her breath. "Just clumsy. You know, a month ago." She glanced at Maria. "Well, things are different now, aren't they?" Maria thought about the community meetings, now held in accessible locations with childcare provided, about the new faces at town council sessions, about the changes spreading through other businesses in town, the grocery store with its bilingual signs, the bank hiring diverse tellers, the school district revising its parent communication method. Her phone buzzed again. Anna this time. "Mama, my college essay about you got me an interview at Yale." The automatic doors whooshed open again, and Maria saw the man in the suit, the one who had cut in line that fateful day. He'd become a regular at the community meetings, surprisingly passionate about implementing change in his own corporate office. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he greeted her warmly. "Did you see the memo? Our cleaning staff will be getting health benefits starting next month, full coverage." Maria nodded, remembering the heated discussions in the boardroom where she used to only enter after hours with her cleaning cart. Now she sat at that same table twice a month, her voice carrying as much weight as any executive's. "Isabella," the pharmacist called out, "could you help Mrs. Chen with the new Spanish translations? We want to make sure they're conversational, not just technical." Maria watched as Isabella moved confidently to join the discussion. A month ago, such a scene would have been unimaginable. A young Latina pharmacy tech freely offering input to management. "You did this," James said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "All of this." Maria shook her head. We all did this. We just needed someone to go first." Her prescription was ready now, but she lingered, watching the diverse mix of people in the pharmacy. A Korean grandmother was helping a young black mother entertain her fussy toddler. A white teenager was assisting an elderly Hispanic man with the numbered ticket machine. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" It was Mrs. Chen again. Corporate called. "They want to feature our store in their national training video. Would you be willing to tell your story?" Maria thought about all the other pharmacies, all the other invisible people still waiting to be seen. "Yes," she said firmly. "But not just my story. We should include Lucia and James and everyone's story," Mrs. Chen finished, understanding. The pharmacy doors opened again. This time it was Carmen, still in her nursing scrub. "Mama, I got out of clinicals early and thought I'd surprise you." She looked around the pharmacy, smiling. "It's so different now." "Different," Maria agreed, "but not finished. Here is still work to do." Her phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. "Mama, remember that auto parts supplier who wouldn't work with me because my English wasn't good enough? They just called to apologize. Said they'd heard about you at a business community meeting." Carmen read the text over her mother's shoulder and squeezed her arm. "You see, it spreads, like ripples in water." Maria watched as a new customer entered, a young woman in a cleaner's uniform, looking tired but determined. The woman hesitated at the door, clearly expecting to be overlooked. "Welcome," James called out warmly. "Can I help you get a number?" The woman's surprise at being acknowledged was painfully familiar to Maria. She walked over to her. "First time here?" she asked gently in Spanish. The woman nodded. I usually go to the pharmacy across town. They're not very nice." "Not anymore," Maria said firmly. "Those days are over. Here, let me show you how the new system works." As she explained the numbered tickets and the new policies, Maria saw recognition dawn in the woman's eye. "You are her, aren't you?" she whispered. "The one who spoke up?" "I am," Maria acknowledged. "But more importantly, you are you, and you deserve to be seen." Her phone buzzed again, a reminder about tomorrow's town council meeting where they would be discussing affordable housing initiative. Maria smiled, remembering how far they'd come from that first emotional speech a month ago. The pharmacy intercom crackled again. "Now serving number 47. The woman in the cleaner's uniform looked at her ticket and smiled. "That's me." "Go ahead," Maria encouraged her. "They'll see you now." As the woman walked confidently to the counter, Maria felt Carmen's arm slip through hers. "Ready to go home, Mama?" Maria took one last look around the pharmacy, at James greeting customers with respect, at Isabella confidently consulting with Mrs. Chen, at the diverse mix of people all being treated with equal dignity. "Yes," she said softly, "but tomorrow we keep working. There are still too many invisible people out there waiting for their moment to be seen." As they walked out into the sunlight, Maria's phone buzzed one final time. It was a message from Barbara. Community Relations Committee just approved funding for a multilingual community center. "We're naming it the Visibility Project. You started this, Maria. You showed us how to see each other." Maria smiled, remembering the angry, hurt woman she'd been a month ago, standing in line with her crumpled prescription and her broken dignity. That woman had found her voice, and in doing so had helped others find theirs. The work wasn't finished. It might never be finished, but something had fundamentally changed in their community. People who had once looked through each other now looked at each other. Those who had been silent now spoke. Those who had never listened were beginning to hear. And it had all started with 5 simple words. "I am standing right here."